Kevin Kamps talks about how we almost lost to Detroit to nuclear power lobbying and democracy as well. Some big problems right now in the nuclear industry with the coronavirus. Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Kevin Kamps is on the line with us. He's the regulatory waste specialist at beyondnuclear.org. I can't even remember how George W. Bush used to mispronounce that, but nuclear, I can't even say it. Anyhow, nuclear, okay, Sean tells me. Beyond Nuclear is the Twitter handle as well. And Kevin, welcome back to the program. Thank you for dropping by today. There's a whole bunch of new news that has to do with our ticking time bomb of a nuclear power generation system across the country. Where would you like to start?
Yeah, the pronunciation, nuclear, kind of like peculiar, am I here? So.
Yeah.
Oh, there is so much going on. I'm in Michigan during the pandemic with my family, and right here there's breaking news left and right. So for one thing, we just learned from the Toledo Blade yesterday evening that the Fermi Unit 2 refueling outage has been suspended for a prolonged or extended safety stand down, as the company is calling it. And it's directly
Fermi
related
2 is the reactor near Detroit, right?
Yeah, Fermi Unit 1 was the infamous meltdown in 1966. We Almost Lost Detroit, the book by John Fuller, that was then made into a song by Motown, We Almost Lost Detroit. And Fermi Unit 2 has been operating since 1988. It is a Fukushima Daiichi twin design, so we know what it's capable of. And incredibly, the COVID-19 spread at the nuclear plant seems to be so bad that the company has suspended the refueling outage. This is something that rarely to never happens, and it must be bad if they've done so. And it's very telling that the company did this, not the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which really is AWOL. It is derelict in its duty right now. It has washed its hands as a safety regulatory agency of the COVID-19 pandemic, says it's not its department, and OSHA has not stepped in to do anything about it. So it's really out of control.
Yeah. Nate tells me it was Gil Scott Heron who did We Almost Lost Detroit.
Yeah, I couldn't come up with his name. Sorry.
Yeah, there you go. No, it's good. It's and thanks to Nate for that. So my guess is, Kevin, that over the last 20 years, as nuclear power has become less than popular, and working in a nuclear power plant has become something that's weekly ridiculed by Homer Simpson, that probably most of the people coming out of college with engineering degrees are not eager to go to work, or even coming out of high school with a high level of technical competence are not enthusiastic about going to work in a nuclear power plant. And therefore, most of their workforce is probably well over 40, and probably a good chunk of it is north of 50, which means that they are the people who are going to get really, really sick from this virus. And that might account for why the nuclear power plant is shutting down. But companies that have a much younger workforce are not experiencing that kind of, they're not being hit that hard. What do you think? I mean, I'm just speculating.
You're right. Well, no, you're absolutely right. 20 years ago, there were less than 150 graduate students in the United States to fill nuclear engineering ranks. And the industry's pushed back in the last 20 years, gotten federal money to throw at community college students and college students to try to entice them into the industry as nuclear engineers. But it hasn't entirely worked. So what you do have is a very aged workforce, like you said, that is vulnerable. And making matters worse, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has done worse than nothing. What they've done is they've given the industry everything it's asked for in the past several weeks. So, for example, limits on work hours, 12-hour per day limits, 72-hour work week limits, which are already pretty extreme in a high-stress nuclear power plant. They have taken those limits off, and now it's 16 hours per day, up to 86 hours per week. People working that many hours, especially under stress, it's the equivalent of drinking 3 beers on the job in terms of your mental acuity. So mistakes can get made. As you said, people could be more vulnerable to contracting the virus in this weakened physical state. A coalition of nearly 90 groups wrote to the vice president about this, saying something has to be done. That was on Earth Day, and we've yet to hear a response.
And interestingly, there's a 72-hour limit on trucking, truck drivers, and an absolute limit, or maybe it's a similar limit. Maybe I'm wrong on the number, but there are limits on how many hours truck drivers can drive, per day, per week, and until they hit a maximum and all that kind of stuff. The Trump administration has suspended most of those rules too, so expect to see far more trucking accidents. I saw an email you sent. It just arrived a few minutes ago, actually, about leakage at one of these plants.
Yeah, again from Michigan. This time in southwestern Michigan, where I'm at. It's the Cook nuclear power plant. 2 giant reactors, each over 1,000 megawatts electric, and Unit 2 had a primary coolant leak just a few days ago. So it's the first incident of this severity in the country that we know of this year so far, and it just happened in the middle of this pandemic.
What happens to a nuclear power plant if its primary coolant leaks to the point that it's no longer covering the core?
Well, fortunately, the leak rate that I remember reading about was 8 gallons per minute, which is relatively small. But it did violate technical specifications, and they were able to bring the reactor down to 0 power levels. But it's a very serious incident when you're leaking primary coolant water because, worst case scenario, you leak enough of that and you're going to have a meltdown. So fortunately, this time they were able to bring it under control. They are at 0% power. They're still hot, though. You have to cool a reactor for days until it's in cold shutdown. That's what went wrong at Fukushima Daiichi. They couldn't cool the reactors that were still hot, and so they had the meltdown. So fortunately, it seems things are a lot more stable at Cook Unit 2, but it shows that incidents can happen, certainly during a pandemic, which raises all kinds of questions. I mean, how do you evacuate a population when you're supposed to be sheltering in your house? You can't do both. So those are the risks they're running by operating nuclear power plants this time.
That's remarkable. And for those people who may not be old enough to remember 3 Mile Island and the infamous movie with what was it, Jane Fonda in that, or whoever it was,
Michael Douglas, Jack Lemmon,
Who and by the way, if you're sheltering in place and you want a good movie to watch, I don't know if it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime or what, but it's probably out there someplace. What was the title of the movie?
China Syndrome.
The China Syndrome. That's right. It was the China Syndrome. Just give us a quick recap of what happens if somebody working in a nuclear power plant finally just is so exhausted that they fall asleep because they've been working more than 70 hours, and a coolant leak happens and it just keeps on leaking.
Yeah, well, if you lose the coolant to the core, you can't cool the hellishly hot core, which is 600 degrees Fahrenheit. And if the temperature keeps going up to something like 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when the cladding on the fuel rods ignites or melts. It's zirconium. And now you have a reactor core meltdown, and you hope that containment holds and that hazardous releases of radioactivity are not emitted into the environment. But at 3 Mile Island, there were emissions. There's various theories as to how that happened. There were hydrogen explosions that took place. And so people were exposed to hazardous radioactivity downwind. The official version is that nobody got hurt. Well, talk to, literally thousands of families who lost people to cancer, for example, afterwards. And that class action lawsuit was run out of time by the courts, unfortunately. So those people were just left to suffer on their own, or they reached settlements with the company, which required non-disclosure. They had to just be quiet about it if they were going to get their money. So, the casualties from a trucking incident due to fatigue are serious, but compared to a nuclear reactor meltdown, add some orders of magnitude.
Yeah. All the information's over at beyondnuclear.org. And Kevin Kamps, the radioactive waste specialist. Kevin, thanks for dropping by. It's always great talking with you.